All right, well, cool. Well, I have Pranav Piyush here with me, who's the co-founder and CEO of Paramark with me. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, and I'm excited about talking about this topic. It's going to be fun.
I think it'll be good. I mean, you've had a lot of great content coming out from LinkedIn over the last, handful of years, and I think the big narrative that I wanted to actually hit on before we even get into the big subject of incrementality testing is the battle between MTA and MMM. And
Mm.
so I think we should start there because I think you've got a really great perspective because I think there are a bunch of things that people don't know about MTA tools, multi-touch attribution, for those that don't know, that they should know to make sure that they're making the right decisions. And I think ultimately, as any marketer, you, me, everyone, we always want to make the right, good decisions on where we're putting our money. And so we want to make sure that we're not necessarily putting it down in the wrong areas. So I think I wanted to have you kind of open it there of just like any misconceptions that you feel that people have around measurement as it relates to your POV on MTA versus MMM models.
Oh man, the whole podcast is going to go down that route
Good.
now. But I'll give you my summary view on it. I think the the whole industry has used the word attribution incorrectly, and it's really interesting. I talked about it on LinkedIn a little bit, right? Like if you look up the meaning of the word attribution, it really means cause and effect, something being attributed to something, right? Something causing something else. And
Mhm.
so if you think about the meaning of the word, it's cause and effect. And then you look at the actual mechanics of what happens inside a multi-touch attribution model. And when you really study the science of it from a statistical perspective, you realize there is no cause and effect in that thing.
Mhm.
People are coming up with all types of like random ways of doing it, right? First touch, last touch, W, U, linear, decay. They throw in the word data driven attribution and somehow it becomes cause and effect. No, it doesn't. So that itself, like the meaning of the word, the meaning of the term is an oxymoron in my opinion. Like there's no cause and effect, and yet we call it attribution.
Mhm.
Fine, that's one issue. The second issue is by definition, there are marketing channels that do not generate a digital touch and still influence your audience.
Mhm.
Guess what? That is like the majority of marketing.
Mhm.
Think about our own experiences on all these social platforms, right? Like, are we interacting and then like clicking through and buying something right there and then? No, it doesn't
Exactly.
work like that. So, how can you expect an MTA model to be representative of all marketing when it doesn't even account for most marketing channels, paid
Yeah.
social, video, TV, audio, even I would argue events, right? Like nobody's clicking on anything, right? Like, so this whole idea that you can somehow do, attribution through this like touch and click tracking, I think is broken. Now, the data itself is not bad. There's goodness in the fact that somebody clicked on something. Okay, great. Just don't call it attribution. I call it analytics, and that's a perfectly reasonable use case for that data. But the moment you start to think about it as attribution and start making budget decisions, now you're on a slippery slope. So I'm just going to say that, leave it out there for people to kind of, take it the way they want to take it. And I get a lot of hate from MTA defenders. So, they'll tell me like to take their position. They will say, well, MTA was never meant to be causal. It was never meant to have a cause and effect. Like, okay, what is
Mhm.
it meant for then? Like, why is it called attribution and what is it meant for? Like, well, it's meant to understand the customer journey. Okay, so let's not call it attribution because you're confusing a
Right.
whole generation of marketers. So to me, words are important. Words matter. That is the most powerful thing we have as marketers are our words. So, okay, I'm gonna tone it down now.
No, I agree. No, I love the rant, man. I love the rant. I agree. I mean, I think, it's I mean, a perfect example of this in the organic world, because you post a lot organically, is that, I can look back to the data and I that a lot of the people that comment and like on my post are not always the ones that come in inbound asking, "Hey, can you help us with paid?" It's many of the people that have never even engaged with one of my posts or probably one of your posts. They're all of the passive people that are looking at things. And then you look at average click-through rates on lots of campaigns, whether it be LinkedIn, Meta, whatever channel you want to pick. I mean, LinkedIn, for example, I mean, zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.8, something like that. But let's just say sub 1% in most cases, unless we're talking about a different campaign objective. And so that means the vast majority of people that are seeing that message, seeing that piece of content, are not clicking on it. They are
Yeah,
literally
exactly.
just consuming the message. Maybe others maybe are distracted. Other maybe didn't care, not in the market. Whatever, they moved on with life. And so, to your point, if you're just looking at click-based attribution, you're missing out on a huge portion of people that are just not taking that journey.
Correct.
So,
Exactly.
and I think the other thing too that's interesting that you said as well, the first touch, last touch thing. One thing we always get into battles with all sorts of SaaS brands is that they may have an MTA vendor, but then we have conflicting ways and
Yeah.
conflicting models of the ways that we look at the data. Of course, you can, with a flick of the switch the model to whatever shape you want, right? Linear, decay, first, last. I mean, all sorts of things. And the data, of course, moves around
Mhm.
when you make those changes because each model is asking kind of or answering a different question. And so then you get into these arguments of, well, no, well, we're looking at a first touch, we're first touch only. Like we don't really care about last or anything that happens in the middle. And so then it kind of just makes it a very tough conversation as well. But yeah, that's interesting, your perspective on that. So
I really think, man, you got to burn it all down because it's a disease. It's an
yeah,
addiction, and if you don't burn it all down, you have your feet in both boats, you're gonna drive yourself mad.
yeah, agreed. All right, well, let's get to the main topic, incrementality testing. I think you've been talking about it for a long time, and I know you've been doing this stuff for years, even before Paramark. But I want to get into just like the basics. I think you'd probably agree that there's a lot of people, non-marketers and marketers, that have never done an incrementality test, especially in B2B, nor really know what is and how to position it with management and other things like that. So why don't we just like simply define like what is an incrementality test and then
Yeah,
go from there?
no, that's a good question. So to talk about incrementality testing, you kind of have to define what do we mean by the word incrementality itself. And I have a very simple explanation. If a prospect would have become a buyer regardless of what marketing you put in front of them, then that marketing wasn't incremental.
Mm-hmm.
Vice versa, if a prospect would have become a buyer only if they saw a piece of marketing, then that marketing is very incremental. And so you're trying to get to this like very crisp, clear definition of, is this marketing incremental? Is this the reason why somebody is becoming a customer?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. Okay. There's no first touch, last touch. There's no none of that. It's just very clear. Did this marketing cause this conversion?
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how do you get to that level of, causality. And if you think back to this whole, idea of incrementality testing, it actually comes from the field of science. So everything that we talk about, right? A/B testing, incrementality testing, all of this comes from biomedical sciences, chemistry,
Yeah,
physics.
drug trials
Drug
was kind of
trials is a
early.
great
Mhm.
example
Yeah.
where you have to prove or disprove hypotheses. That is the
Mm-hmm.
fundamental nature of science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is you're proving or disproving a hypothesis. Now, let's talk about the scientific method. How do you prove or disprove a hypothesis? First, you have to have a hypothesis. My
Mm-hmm.
hypothesis is when I invest my money on YouTube, I am going to get more conversions. Okay, great. How can you test it? Very simple terms. You take an audience on YouTube that see your ads and take an audience on YouTube that don't see your ads. Now you compare the conversion rate from the audience that did see your ads versus the audience that did not see your ads.
Right.
And did you see a lift or did you not see a lift?
Yep.
That is a science experiment. This is what we all did in school in our science classes. Somehow we forgot about it, that you
We
can apply
forgot a
the same
while ago.
methodology. We forgot that you
Yeah.
can apply this simple methodology to marketing.
Yep.
So in very simple terms, that's what incrementality testing is.
Hmm.
You have to have, a few things. You have to have a hypothesis. You have to have a test bucket and a control bucket. You have to run the experiment for enough time with enough budget to be able to see a valid lift or lack thereof. And that is incrementality testing. We can get into
Yeah.
more details, but let me pause and see if you have any questions.
No. I think that makes sense. And I think the natural thing, and I know you and I have, I think, talked about this a bit, but I think other people would get some insight from this as well, is who is a good fit for doing incrementality testing? And are there
Mm,
variables around the maturity from a data perspective, how much they're spending monthly on ad spend, if it's an advertising type of play, the size of the company, the stage that they're at? I mean, are there any things that reliably like, hey, this is a variable that we feel like is something that would lead to doing incrementality tests? Whereas, hey, if you're not really there, you're too small, you don't have enough data, you're really not mature enough to do this, you probably don't need to think about this right this second. Instead, you should rely on MTA models, other click-based forms, et cetera, till you get to a certain size. Would you say that there's some variable there, or no?
It's a very good question. And the honest answer is no, everybody can do it. Now, let me explain. Why am I taking such an extreme stance? What I described was a very scientific way of doing it, right? Where you can split your test and control buckets perfectly. In fact, 50-50. Now, guess what? You can actually call up Google today or Meta, and they will set this test up for you on YouTube or Meta. Mm-hmm. Now, they will not serve really, really small brands because it's not worth their time, right? But if you're a big spender, if you're spending tens of thousands, 50,000, whatever on these channels, you can actually call your rep and they will set it up for you. So that's the first thing. If you haven't done that, please go talk to your rep. So there's a gold standard of doing it in a very controlled way where you split it perfectly 50-50. There's a lower standard where you do your split of audience based on geographies. And, you know, if you wanted to get very precise with the statistics and the science, you know, you might want to have a marketing analyst or a data scientist look at how you're doing the splits, because not every geography is the same. So the data science tries to make sure that you're picking the right set of geographies that are somewhat comparable. And that's how you're splitting your test and control. Now, if I were spending Paramark's money, my baseline is nothing. I got nothing, right? Like, it's like, okay, maybe I have a few, you know, blobs in SF and New York, maybe in London and Australia. We've got some traffic there. But how do I do it? Well, here's the thing. If you understand the concept of incrementality testing, you can still do this without any fancy software. This is what I would do. I look at my Google Analytics. Yes, Google Analytics is awesome, contrary to what people believe. And I would look at the map of my traffic and visitors, and I see where the hotspots are. And when I make my first ad purchase on YouTube, we'll stick with the YouTube example, I'm going to narrow it to one of those hotspots and not do it everywhere across the board, across the globe.
Mm-hmm. So just to stop real quick. So hotspot would just be if I took the top 5 most trafficked states in the US, you would say pick one of those hotspots based on most traffic, right?
Precisely. I take that and I put all my YouTube dollars into that one location, and I don't do it anywhere else. Now, you're running an incrementality test. Yet it's not perfectly statistically, you know, sound. Yes, like data scientists will tell me, Pranav, you're giving bad advice. But remember the context. This is the first time I'm doing this spend. I don't have a data scientist. I don't have a marketing analyst. What is one supposed to do, right? So if I'm in that situation, I'm going to concentrate all my spend in this one location. And what am I looking for in terms of signal? I'm going to give it 3 to 4 weeks, and I'm going to look for the signal of, did my traffic go up in that location compared to everywhere else? You can do this analysis in Excel. You can look at your traffic day over day, week over week, by location, and you can see, did I create an inflection point because I invested in YouTube for those 4 weeks? And then look at some down funnel metrics as well. Hopefully you're doing IP tracking on your forms. If you are, you got location. You got a location. You can now see, did your leads go up and by how much? So it doesn't take a whole bunch to do this. Yes, it's not perfect, but it is 10 times better than MTA. And it is going to give you very clear evidence. You can take it back to your CFO and your board. Look what we did. We ran an experiment. We only launched it in, you know, Miami and not anywhere else. And look at our Miami traffic and look at our Miami leads. I don't know. This is like the simplest way that you can win your CFO's trust and confidence, because you're not, you know, pissing away money.
I love how simple you make it. I mean, I think honestly, that's the name of the game. I think with so many things in marketing is trying to take away the complexity, take away the acronyms, take away all this stuff and make it easy, because ultimately there's just so much going on, especially some of these earlier stage SaaS brands. But you mentioned something interesting too on the timeline that I was going to get to. And so you said, you know, 3 or 4 weeks or so to run this test. Let's say, you know, we pick Miami, like you said, we run a test for 3 to 4 weeks on YouTube, and then we're looking at traffic and leads. In a scenario though, where I'm looking across the whole US and I'm maybe only getting 20 demos, for example, a month or something like that across the whole US. And then if you boil that down to Miami, maybe you're getting, you know, 1 or 2 or something like that. Do you feel like there's situations where you'd still would need a little bit more data, where you'd extend that time frame a bit longer to feel confident around some of those lagging indicators? Does anything, I mean, are we getting into like statistical significance? Would you want it longer based on some other variable? How do you think about that?
Yeah, great question. So if to your point, use some common sense. If you're getting 20 demos in, nationally, and
Mm-hmm.
Miami only gets one demo in a month, well, that's a bad test, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like 1 to 2 is not necessarily evidence of lift. One
Right.
to two is noise.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why I say go study this enough to know what is a good test and not a good test, right? Don't just like throw up your arms and say like, I don't know statistics. No, you're a marketer, you're a modern marketer. You need to understand this stuff. So
Yeah.
just like you asked me this question, it's like, hey, Pranav, that doesn't make sense to me, right? Yes, it doesn't. So
Right.
pick a bigger area. Maybe only
Exactly.
do it in one half of the country, right? So now you have 10 to work with.
Love that.
Now going from 10 to 20, that seems like a big enough lift, right?
Right.
And if
Right.
you're going from 10 to 11, okay, that didn't really move the needle too much. When you're a small startup, you're not trying to make a 10% improvement, you're trying to make a 100% improvement.
Right.
So
Right.
by definition, you're looking for bigger bets and bigger sort of lift in your numbers. So
Exactly.
the meta point here is get really comfortable with how this stuff works at scale and figure out how to make it work at your scale rather than saying it doesn't work for small brands, so I'm not going to do it.
I love that. I love that. That's a good point. There was something else you said too, a little bit related to this on LinkedIn a little while ago, which is always a hot button topic for everyone, which is brand campaigns on Google. And I love this point, and I fully agree with what you said. And for those that didn't see it, it was really the point of testing turning off brand completely, either in a geo specifically or even just completely, just in whole, just turn it off. And then to look at the incremental or decrease potential and results over a period of time to understand if, hey, these people would have come in anyway, right? They typed in Paramark, they're probably looking to go to the Paramark's website. I think you guys probably ranked number one organically, so they're going to get there anyway. You might have had an ad before, so yeah, now Google's going to take credit, as Google loves to do. And so you had a whole good bit about thinking about incrementality as it relates to this Google brand thing. And I wanted you to kind of like revisit that one more time for people, because I think everyone always has a tough time walking away from their brand campaigns, because typically, of course, they have the highest CTR, they have the highest conversion rates. They typically, of course, have the most demos, opportunities, of things like that. And so one might think, oh my God, Pranav, there's no way I can turn off my brand campaign. It's one of my
Yeah.
best performing campaigns. What would
I
you say to
mean,
them on that?
I laugh because I've had that conversation so many times with prospects and customers, right? So I'll give you a fun example. I was talking to somebody 2 or 3 days ago. I'm not going to name the brand, but it's a software company. They have a SaaS, and they have a unique name. Okay, it's a very unique name.
Hmm.
Perfect. Coincidentally, this giant pharmaceutical company launches a product with the exact same name.
No way. Wow.
Yep. And they start throwing money at it because branded search ads are awesome, right? So
Hmm.
suddenly they're pushed down. They can't ever beat this pharmaceutical company because guess what? Pharmaceutical companies have a lot of money.
Yep.
And so the CEO of this company wakes up one day and is like, we got to do something about this. Our ads, our paid leads are, down and going to the right. Like what's going on, marketing team? And so the marketing team is like, well, let's look at the total aggregate leads. They're still going up and to the right. So
Right.
what are we talking about here? Oh, the false labeling of a lead as paid or organic just because they clicked on a Google link. And this person had reached out to me to just want to chat about, am I going crazy or am I like thinking about the right way? I'm like, no, you're thinking about the right way. If your aggregate leads are still going up and to the right, who cares whether they came from the branded ad or from organic? You're
Right.
actually wasting money by putting money into that brand ad. Let that big pharmaceutical company waste their money. You,
Yeah.
you have nothing to lose. So that's hopefully a good explanation of the topic that everyone talks about. Now, there was somebody else on that LinkedIn comment who said, "But Pranav, genuinely, what do I do if all my competitors are bidding on my branded keyword?"
Hmm.
Okay, I understand that. And here's my take. Do you think your competitors are swaying those customers away? Why are they? just because of one text ad, you have a bigger problem if that is the case.
Right, right.
You see what I'm saying? And so that's not the branded search ad, but if you're so defensive where people are able to sway your customers that when
Mm,
they had intent to search for your brand and then
right.
they get swayed by somebody else, oof, that's a tough business, my friend.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say there. And I would
Mm,
say, please test it. Turn it off in one geography and see if any of those leads were incremental or not. And I
right.
can guarantee to you that almost always people are over invested. It doesn't mean don't do any
100%.
investment. All I'm talking about is the level of investment has to be right sized. It has to be corrected.
And I think everyone doesn't, I mean, no one wants to pay Google any more than they have to, right? So, I mean, everyone should be completely open to the idea of doing this. I mean, there really should be no reason not to, you know? Because to your point, at the end of the day, the intent was to search for your brand. They're going to find that brand. Now, I could say logically stepping back, I mean, with competitor campaigns, because we do run them. I mean, clearly, if I am doing due diligence on a specific category of product and say one comes to mind easier than another, so I type in, say, Paramark or whatever their brand, and then I see an ad for some other competitor, and I just know that I've got to put a couple of options in front of my boss. Yeah, I might click on it, and I might get to get a demo from both because I'm trying to better understand my options of how they compare. You might have different pricing than the other competitor. You might have something different than that. I mean, in terms of capabilities, all sorts of things like that happen. But to your point, if you've got a situation where people are literally, doing a 180 and saying, nope, I searched for Paramark. I don't really care, and I don't want to talk to Paramark anymore. I'm just going to go talk to whoever else down below. That's a bigger issue to your point. That means that maybe we haven't done a good enough job educating the market, building awareness, building brand and other social channels. And so then you got to address those things in other ways. So
Very well said. That's exactly it. And the other thing that I think about in that conversation is that brand building that everyone loves to hate on has to happen way before people are searching.
yeah,
And that's got to be the case as how you get more and more people to search for your specific brand.
right, right.
Um, and there's nothing wrong with competitor search term sort of bidding. Do it within reason. It
Yep.
can't be the majority of your spend. So again, back to this is a
Agreed.
portfolio game. If you have $100 to spend, very often I will see 20%, 30% going to branded search ads. And
Yep.
I'm like, oh, that is not a wise use of money. Now,
Yep.
I will add one more thing. Why does this happen? It happens because somebody built an MTA model.
Mm,
Branded search looks great.
mm.
CFO's like, amazing, put more money into branded search ads. And you've created this self-fulfilling vicious cycle of your measurement sucks, your CFO believes your wrong measurement, and asks you only to invest in the thing that your broken measurement is pointing to.
Yep.
And now your goals are set on it. So suddenly, if goals are set on MTA and you pull back spending on branded search ads, and all those leads now go to direct and organic,
Right.
you look like shit in front of the CFO.
And guess what happens? That brand campaign gets turned right back on and Google starts making the money again.
So
Yep.
this is one of the hardest problems that marketers have gotten themselves into,
Mm,
because you have to break out of MTA. You have to break out not just as a marketing team, but also as a finance team. And you
right.
have to
Mm.
show them that we are here to drive incremental growth, not to take credit.
Yeah, I love that. When do you think when do you think it's important to run these types of incrementality tests? I mean, I think the common scenario might be a brand might have 25 different campaigns running across multiple different channels. And so we used an example before of YouTube, Miami, or half the country, et cetera, et cetera. When do you think it's appropriate to run these types of tests, and how many do you think brands should be running per year? How do you think about that? Is there a right number? Is it more? Is it less? Is it a specific type of campaign that's maybe bigger impact versus one that's lower impact? I mean, how does someone make that decision? And what do you see most brands doing in terms of running incrementality tests?
I think there are three sources of tests or test ideas or hypothesis ideas. One is every time you're launching a new channel, you should really be thinking about testing it. And the reason I say that is very easy to spend $2,000, $5,000, $10,000. Just throw the money out there and you don't have any causal evidence of is that working or not working. And then 6 months later, you're looking back and you're like, oh, I just like bled $20,000. Did it actually do something for me? I don't know. It's like,
Right.
no, if you structure it as an upfront clear test, you can get signal right away within the first
Mm.
4 weeks of whether it's working or not.
Mm.
So new channels, I would always recommend running as an incrementality test. You have to invest enough to be able to see signal, but that's like common sense, right?
Yep. Yep.
um, the second source of hypotheses is often when you are looking at your MTA model or your MMM model and it's telling you something, right? MMM model, I just said that. Oh my God, no, it's marketing mix model. It's already
Yep.
included in the acronym MMM.
Yep.
So if you're looking at your MTA model or you're looking at your MMM and they are indicating that a certain channel is more efficient or less efficient,
Mm.
go test that,
Right.
right? If it's saying it's very efficient, go double down on it, put more
Mm.
money in there, right?
Mm.
That's a source of hypotheses. So new
Mm.
channels, and then
Mm-hmm.
the outputs from your existing attribution model, whichever model you use, that should inform the testing roadmap. Then there's a third, your creative team.
Mm-hmm.
Unleash the creativity of your team and let them cook. And what that means is come up with concepts that are related to your category entry points, to your jobs to be done, new creative ideas, because guess what? That is the backbone of your entire marketing budget. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
testing new creatives and new creative ideas, whichever channel that you're on, you are not figuring out what works or what doesn't work for you. You're just stuck in the same sort of loop. So that's the third place where I would think about for testing. I'm sure there are others, but these are like three very clear starting points.
Right. I think it's a good crisp kind of list of things, because I think that clarifies it for some people of the when do I think about doing this, because everyone either has an MT model or they're in a world where they're just using Salesforce or HubSpot, first or last touch or some kind of like weird mix of multi-touch. And so they're probably saying, all right, well, when do I actually do this thing? When should I, initiate this on XYZ campaign? So I think that creates a pretty good list.
Yeah, the other thing that I did not answer was how many can you run? And there's one
Mm.
other concept that I have here. Every team, every marketing team should have a roadmap of experiments.
Mm.
You ought to dedicate 10 to 20% of your budget every year on experiments, and that budget should be larger if you're a smaller team.
Mm.
If you're a team of one person with $100,000 budget, guess what? All of it is experimentation.
Mm. Yep.
Because what else are you going to do? Okay, so now the number of experiments that you can run. If you have 20 demos a month, realistically, you can maybe run one experiment at a time
Mhm.
because you're splitting the country into half and half and trying to get signal. So there's a natural limit to how much experimentation you can do.
Mm.
And that's based on the volume of your conversion event. That is the most important thing. If you're in the hundreds, you can probably do still maybe just one test. If you're in the thousands, you can probably do 2 or 3 tests at the same time. If you're
Mm.
tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, now you can run multi-cell tests. So you
Mm.
have multiple different geographies with different sort of campaigns that are set up, right? So this is meant for like really large companies. Um, it also depends on what metric you pick. If you're testing for a demo booking versus a qualified op versus traffic, the numbers are different.
Right.
And, so that gives you some flexibility. People are often too worried about going as down funnel as you can. I think it's an absolute mistake in B2B. That's a separate
Mm.
podcast altogether. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I guide people towards sort of more leading indicators, but more top of funnel, like more at
Right.
the demo booking or, something like that. That is the metric that you're
Right.
picking.
So I guess a good example, because we've been talking about this with our current brand right now, they've just recently spent about $250,000 on a brand marketing campaign that's running predominantly digitally on LinkedIn, Meta, and just kind of your typical channels. And so they have brought up the idea of CTV and doing some CTV campaigns. And so the idea has presented itself, and so I think this is a good example, potentially, tell me wrong or right,
100%.
of saying, hey, great, we've got some really differentiated creative that's relatively new. They spent a lot of money on it. And we also think it's actually pretty good. It's amazing. I wish I could take credit for the work, but the guys did an awesome job. And so the idea would be, all right, well, then let's go ahead and just take this new campaign and launch it potentially in the top performing markets in the US, or split the US in half and say, let's just look at this specific instance where this campaign was ran. And then we'll compare it to the other side of the US and or specific states, depending on the volume of demos. And so that could be a good use case of saying, hey, remember this
100%.
thing called CTV? Let's try it out and see what happens, right?
100%. That's exactly what we're doing. And we're literally doing this for a brand that we're working with right now. So I'm like,
Oh, cool.
oh my God, is this the same brand? I don't think it is. But no, we literally have one of our customers that are launching a CTV campaign in the exact same fashion.
Oh, cool. Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, we'll have to chat on that one. You mentioned something else. I was looking at your website right before we got on, and there was, I think we kind of touched on the geo level. I think that to me is like really, really clear. There was also some things related to user level and then time based, which I think maybe we've covered, but I just wanted to get that really clear in my head in terms of like how you execute a test. And I think you had a couple of different ways that you could approach it, which we clearly talked about the Miami or half the country. But what do you mean by user level and time based? Did we cover those already, or are those different
No, we
things?
haven't. No, let's talk about the user based. So a user based sort of incrementality test is on any platform where you own the identity.
Hmm.
The identity is known and declared. So email, in-app, SMS, these are all sort of user based tests because guess what? You have full control over the randomization.
Mm.
So people, okay, I'll give you this really fun one. People talk about their onboarding campaigns or nurture campaigns, right? In marketing and B2B SaaS, we talk about it all the time.
Yep.
It is simple as heck to set up a 5% holdout in your onboarding campaign. And so you say 5% of my signups are never going to get onboarding emails. Now
Right.
look at the conversion rate from that 5%, then look at the conversion rate from that 95% into whatever metric down funnel that you want to track. So that's a user level incrementality test. And so when you are launching a new onboarding series, don't launch it to 100%. Launch it only at 95%, but make sure that the separation between the two buckets is very, very clean. So whenever you have the identity of the person sort of declared to you, so you're not guessing, right? There's no
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty. You can do these type of user level tests. Very
Mm.
similar to an A/B test. There are some differences that you're doing a holdout, and so you're saying
Right.
whether the existence of this onboarding campaign actually have any effect or not. Is the
Right.
existence of this nurture campaign have any effect on it going from SQL to SQO, right?
Right. Right.
And is the existence of my cold calling to these accounts, account-based marketing is a great one that can be done through this methodology.
Mm.
Give you an example. You have a 5,000 person target account list. Give 2,500 to your BDRs. Do not give the other 2,500 to your BDRs.
Mm.
Track that over 3 months and still do all your LinkedIn marketing to the full 5,000 list. See if there's any conversion lift difference between those two accounts. Now you can
Love that.
quantify the incremental lift from your outbound campaigns down to like precise numbers.
Love that.
I'm like, guess what? Not an original idea. Got this from the team at Snowflake. Hillary, who wrote the whole book on account-based marketing. They
Mm-hmm.
did this.
Mm. That's very cool. I love that. I love that story. There was a you had mentioned this, I think, in a post of like one of the objections though is relates to audience size, and I think this probably comes up from time to time too, where people don't want to limit or narrow the audience. They want to go broad. I think, as you said, one of the objections is relates to incrementality testing in some instances, maybe not in that specific example, where people don't want to, they just want to stay broad, right? We don't want to lose out on an opportunity. We don't want to, we don't want to narrow to this specific section for this one campaign because we got 12 to 18 months to live in terms of runway. We can't afford it, right? We need every single demo we can. So therefore we want to run the campaign. What would you say to that in relation to just people worrying about getting a little bit more narrow to test out something and not exposing, say, another group, whether it be user-based or geo-based or whatever it be, to that type of test?
I think it all comes down to the risk tolerance of the decision maker. So if the decision maker is like, hey, I don't care about efficiency and incrementality and ROI, I just want this message out to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then remember those words. I don't care about effectiveness and efficiency and ROI. I just want this message out in front of everybody. So
Yep.
you can't have your cake and eat it too, and unfortunately in this game, right? So it's about your risk tolerance. And if you're very confident about what you're putting out, go at it. I'm not saying that you
Right.
have to measure everything. I'm not saying you have to test everything, but don't then come back 2 months later and say, oh, hey, marketing, WTF, what happened to that campaign, right?
Yep.
So marketers need to be well versed in this conversation. So when that happens, you can actually talk about it. Hey, I told you about doing a holdout.
Yeah.
You said you didn't want to do a holdout. Totally fine.
Mm.
Right? So you change the tone of the conversation. You go from defense to offense. Here's my best advice to all marketers. Go to your CF and say, hey, what if we just turned off all marketing for a month? How do you feel about that? And I'm not saying this in a challenger way. I'm literally saying in an intellectually honest way. Wouldn't it be nice to find out what would happen if you were to turn marketing down to zero for like 3 weeks
Mm-hmm.
and see what happens, and then we build it back up to generate our confidence?
Do
Like,
you think
watch.
there's sometimes
Yeah.
a, just interrupt you, do you think there's sometimes a bigger lag in those situations where, we always know there's a lag on marketing investments where sometimes you might invest, say, in January, just use a really rudimentary, easy example. But you really don't see a lot of the immediate direct response return in that month. You're seeing it maybe in February or even in March. And so sometimes it might take a little bit longer time for that awareness and for that demand to kind of die down. Do you kind of take that into consideration or?
100%.
Mhm.
So I threw out a number there, 3 weeks, mostly because like anything
Playful.
longer will probably not happen. But the idea that these long-term effects of marketing can be observed very easily in any type of model is very, very hard.
Mm.
So yes,
Yeah.
you can't see the long-term effects very quickly. But here's my counter to that point. If a piece of marketing doesn't work within a matter of days or weeks,
Mm.
it's not going to work ever. Let me explain. We all talk about the 95.5. You just had that interview with John.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking about the 95, but what about the 5 who are in market right now?
Mm.
So there are people in market right now. So
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing with your marketing, you are reaching those 5. So
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying? If you were doing the right things, then
Yeah.
your short-term effect should be visible. And then you have the bonus of the long-term effect. But if your
Right.
short-term effect is like 0, what? Like suddenly you're going to have long-term effect? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
that's not how it works.
See, I love this point. This is a good one because I've got a really good example for this too. Because I think, sometimes I think we always want to bucket things into easy categories just because it's easier on the mind sometimes. Like this 5% is in market and this 95. I mean, we all know that it's, relative, right? Based on interpurchase periods and other things like that. But, there's an interesting example of this same brand I'm actually just mentioned earlier that was thinking about CTV, and they have this brand marketing campaign that's running, and it is not a direct response campaign whatsoever. It is pure, just like, brand memorable, emotional. There's no get a demo at the end.
It's
There's
good marketing.
exactly. It's just good marketing. The funniest thing is that it's one of like their best performing campaigns from a direct response perspective. And so it's like, wait a minute, well, how does this work, right? And it's like, well, of course we're targeting the same campaign at a broad group of people, right? That meet the ICP. There are always going to be a percent of those people that are in market, right? They're in market. So just
I'm jumping with joy in my heart and my brain because that is what good marketing and measurement is for. Is
yeah,
you know this fascination with a call to action and a price discount and a start a free trial and like talk to
right.
sales is just that's
It's
not
not.
how people make decisions. That is not
Yeah,
why people decide to buy.
no, no. Yeah, not at all. I was talking with Mason Cosby over at Scrappy ABM actually yesterday about this exact thing, and his big point was, with a lot of his content on LinkedIn, and I know yours too. It's very like problem narrative based. It's not like, hey, Paramark's doing a 1 for 2 deal this month. Like we do XYZ. Like book a call below if you want. I mean, you're not doing that type of thing. And I mean, his big point was people want to connect to your brand through a problem, a narrative, a situation that they're experiencing, or some frustration or something that they're not meeting in terms of goals. They want to connect themselves to that, and that you potentially are a solution to help them get to that desired goal outcome or whatever it may be. And so he's like, literally, I never talk about what we actually really do. I just talk
Yeah,
about the problems that I experience and the stories that I experience talking to people all the time on the phone. And he's like, that the byproduct of that is people coming in inbound,
100%.
And I know
We
the
see
same
it
is true
all
for
the
you
time in
too.
our business. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
it.
That's great. I want to go to one other thing that I've had a couple of people mention to me recently as it relates to incrementality testing that I think may be interesting, that you probably have a good perspective on, which is really just thinking about more the macroeconomic side of all the things that could potentially happen, not just like in the world, like inflation, interest rates and all that, but also some of the things like, down deep inside the company where you have an early stage SaaS brand that's doing all sorts of things all the time, right? They're changing pricing, they're rebranding, they're changing the
Yep.
messaging, we're repositioning ourselves. There's pages changing, like all sorts of things are happening. And so I'm curious, in a situation where you'd run an incrementality test for, say, a couple of months or a week or whatever the time frame is, how do you think about the other variables that are changing in and around maybe that same geo from teams that maybe you don't really have control of because you're just a marketing manager doing your thing, running a campaign, trying to prove the value of what you're doing, and then you've got product marketing or some other team doing all sorts of other changes that are affecting some of the things that may be happening in that test group that you've created in this test that you're running on, say, YouTube in
Sure.
Miami, for example, to go back to that. How do you feel like those things impact? Do you need to worry about them? Are they worth thinking about? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a little bit of analysis paralysis because in practice, most of the other changes, right? Let's think about pricing. Let's think about other types of product marketing. They're happening at a national level. Why would they go down and do something different for that one geography? So,
Mhm.
unless you have a very large setup, right? So you're billions of dollars, and you've got regional teams, and they're doing regional things. Then you have those worries. But if you're a SaaS brand, you're just starting off, like you're, Series A, Series B, the likelihood that you're doing anything on a regional basis just on a whim is zero.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
so we don't see that issue now. you know all the natural climate things that were happening in Q4, we were running a bunch of tests, and there was a little bit of discomfort. Hey, the states that we had picked for the test were also the states where the I'm forgetting what climate issue there was, but there was some climate issue going on there, right? Some
Mm,
natural disaster. Like, all right, let's switch those states out. And you can just make that decision in real time.
right.
Now, um, that happens once in a blue moon, right? This
Yeah.
idea that the world is like super dynamic and like something is changing all the time is like, no, not at all. Look at your metrics; they're pretty
Right.
stable week over week.
Right.
So
Right.
you
Mine,
know,
mine
it,
is,
it, yeah.
the deep seek stuff, right? And, NVIDIA tanking and all that crazy stuff, or Elon posting on something on X, right? But I'm with you. I mean, I think you're right. It's analysis paralysis. And at the end of the day, I mean, even just to get to the
Think
table,
about it. Do you think the DeepSeek news changed the sign up rate for ChatGPT? Do you think it did?
I wouldn't think so for me.
Precisely.
I
Yeah, it
mean,
didn't.
ChatGPT has so much awareness. Everyone already knows what it is. They're going down that path. I mean, DeepSeek's a headline right now. So,
So
but
that's my point, right? People over
yeah,
index on like these macroeconomic things. I'm not saying it's not good to look at those things in general. It is, but at
yeah,
startup scale, probably not. At
yeah,
bigger
yeah.
scale, absolutely yes.
Agreed. Yeah, same page on that one. You touched on this in the beginning, but I think this is the point I want to hit back because I think this is where everyone always struggles. I think 9 times out of 10, most things come down to communication issues and not being very clear on what we want to do and setting clear expectations. And I think you said that really well earlier, but I wanted to hit on it one more time, which is, let's say that you're a marketing team that hasn't yet run an incrementality test before, and you're trying to get support to do this. Maybe it's turning off brand, maybe it's trying out the CTV campaign, whatever it may be. How do you think about messaging that to someone who's a non-marketer that's like, what? You're going to do what again? You're going to only launch this in this one area? You're going to turn off one of our best performing campaigns to do what again? How does an incrementality test work again? Are there some things that you kind of say that would be slightly different to a non-marketer than a marketer as it relates to incrementality testing in terms of getting any type of approval to move that forward?
Well, there's a few things there. One is it all depends on the context and the situation, right? Who's your audience? And are we talking about the CFO, CEO, CRO? Are we talking about more of your ops and analytics peers? Who are we really talking
Let's
about?
say
Because
CFO just for this example, just for fun. Like everybody's at
perfect.
CFO.
You can't spring this upon anybody in the executive team without context and change management that has happened before that.
Mhm.
So you're not going in and just saying, hey, we're going to run a bunch of experiments. No, like, what is the goal? The goal is to drive more growth, or the goal is to become more efficient because, hey, we're feeling some, pressure as a business. Whatever it is, right? Is it savings? Is it making more money? Is it, profitable growth? Align on it, agree to set aside budget for experimentation to go figure out how to solve that question. So this is happening at the annual planning level. This is happening at the quarterly business review level. And you have to have a whole methodology and a way to communicate with executives that's very different from the details. You don't want to bore them with the details. You want the air cover that, hey, we're trying to increase growth and do it within our CAC targets. And
Right.
we're asking for 20% of our budget to be set aside for that experimentation.
Mm.
Do we have alignment that that is a good goal? If the
Yep.
CFO says no, then understand why they're saying no. Well, what are you afraid of? Okay,
Mm.
understand the objections from them. It's like you do anything, right? So that's like the fundamental sort of communication skill set.
Yeah.
And then hopefully don't even have to talk to them about how you're going to set it up. You're just going to tell them, here are the 5 tests, here's the timeline, next QBR, I'll tell you how the test performed.
Mm.
There is not a single executive I have met in my career who will look at that and go like, don't do it.
Mm.
Don't experiment. I
Yeah.
don't want experiment results. Like
Right.
that
Right.
doesn't happen. So if you set it up correctly, if you're doing it in an executive way, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it comes back to like, hey, what's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? What's the hypothesis? And then, ultimately, like, what's the expectation of how long we're going to run this? Like, yada, yada. As long as people kind of come in and they understand what's going on and there's agreement from the get go, then everyone's going to be fine on the same page. And to your point, like, if there's pushback or they have some issue, then address it and figure it out. Or you supporting evidence from other things? I mean, send them some documentation and say, hey, like, here's how it works. Here's other people that have had success with it. Here's what they found. I mean, I don't have any, honestly, links. I'd love to, if you have any, I'm sure you do, of like saying, hey, here was a company that is spending 20% of their budget, to your point, on brand. They turned it off and they redirected all that budget over here into the non-brand campaigns or into awareness campaigns. And this was the result. Like, this is what we want to do, CFO, this type of thing. And it's like, oh shit, now you just made it real. It's not just a little idea you had in your head. It's actually another brand over here that's legitimate, had success, ran a test, and now they've completely reallocated budget, and ultimately the company's doing better. And so to me, like, those things where you get some third-party validation really make the conversation a lot easier.
There's so many examples. So you've given me a good idea for creating a blog post around this. eBay did a study back in 2011 where they turned off eBay, right? Like there was
Yeah,
a
well,
public company at the heyday, turned off all their brand search ads. Everything just went to organic, no problem. It
yeah.
was 2011. It was written. The paper was written by some Berkeley
I think I
professors.
remember this. It sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. Uber recently, this guy went viral on LinkedIn, Sundar. If you haven't checked out his profile, just 2 days ago, he wrote about how they turned off $25 million of spend, not on brand, but on like some other thing. And nothing changed. I think that LinkedIn
Wow.
post has 8,000 likes right now.
I believe it. I believe it.
So these examples are all out there, and you can absolutely take those examples to your CFO. Now you're giving me a really good idea to have one slide with like 3 examples that you can take to your CFO. It's great.
100%. To me, that's the way it's got to be, right? Like, here's my plan, here are the goals, here's what I want to do, et cetera. Hey, by the way, if you've never done this thing before, take a look at like how this worked for some other companies. Yeah, I think you get their attention real quick because, I mean, who wouldn't want to try and figure out the answer to that? I mean, obviously, especially if you can create a more causal type of relationship versus just your good old MTA stuff.
Now the unfortunate part is, Jonathan, I can't talk about our customers, but we see savings of that nature all the time. Just had a brand that's a Series B or Series C brand. We're spending close to about $1.5 million on YouTube. Zero incrementality.
Wow.
Zero.
Wow. That's incredible.
Ran it over
Seriously.
8 weeks.
How much did you say? 1.25 million?
I think close to $1.5 million a year on YouTube
Wow.
ads and zero incrementality. So
Wow.
money saved. Now the real question is, nobody cares about savings at that stage. What they really care about is, how do I make it work?
Right.
And so now you're back to the drawing board about what is the creative, right? That's what is it going to take to get it to be incremental? Because you can't just give up and say, oh, okay, we found 1.5 in savings and like Series C company,
therefore turn off
my
YouTube.
job's done.
Yeah.
That's the wrong outcome. So like the savings are there, my friend, like so much waste that happens because people don't have the right measurement.
Yeah. Love it. I know we're almost at time. Anything that we didn't touch that you think would be really important to leave people with as it relates to measurement, attribution, incrementality, all things measurement?
No, I think you had lots of good questions. I would say if you are on Meta, that is the only platform that has made this super easy. There is a native capability to run incrementality tests on Meta. It's self-serve. You can go use it right now log into your Meta Ads Manager, you'll see it under the Experiments tab. So go play with that if you have access to a Meta Ads Manager. And you can apply the same principles in DIY methods on other channels, but that's the one channel where it's super easy.
Love it, man. If people want to find you, I assume LinkedIn's probably the best spot to go and look you up.
LinkedIn is great. I'm just Pranav Piyush. You will find me. Just search for measurement Pranav. You'll probably be able to find me.
All right. We'll call it there, man. Well, thanks for jumping on for a little bit. And I think this is great. I think people are going to get some awesome value from it.
I appreciate it, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
All right, man.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to another episode of the Demand Podcast. Again, I'm Jonathan Bland, the co-founder of Omni Lab. I'll also have with me Jason Steele, who's the other co-founder of Omni Lab on this podcast as well. We're a demand gen agency for seed to Series B SaaS startups. If you like this episode, or you're looking for some help with demand gen, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn over a DM, or you can go just directly to our website. That's omnilabconsulting.com. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on the next episode where we'll be talking about all things demand gen. Until then, thanks. Bye-bye.